Hey, everybody. Welcome to the last of 4 sessions here. Every week for the last 4 weeks, we've been trying to look deeply at one of the core prayers of the high holidays. Last year, and you can find this on our website, we did kind of an overview, a boot camp, where we really tried to get a sense of what all of the prayers of the high holidays were. But this year, we're trying to go deep and to go especially deep into not just an understanding of the prayers, but I called this series the psychology of the high holy day prayers, because we are trying to get into the to understand the sort of psychic place that the prayer is aiming towards, or aiming to take us towards. What is this prayer meant to do inside of us? And one of the things that I've been saying again and again is that when we see design in prayer, when we see that the prayer is not just an expression of emotion or desire or some other kind of prayer feeling, but actually the prayer has some kind of structure, some kind of like a noticeable design. That design tells us that the author of the prayer wants to do something to us, to take us somewhere, to, through the movement of the prayer, do some kind of movement inside of us and get us somewhere. So we've been looking at that as we've looked at the various major prayers of the high holidays. And I have to say, on my end, it's been hard work. It's hard work. It's hard work because these are the most important prayers of the year, the most designed prayers of the year, the most intensely and thoughtfully constructed prayers of the year. But because of that, they really take a lot of unpacking. I mean, it really, like some of the architecture here is nearly Byzantine. And if you were with us a couple of weeks ago for our dive into the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah, I mean, we could barely get through the entire structure before we started asking the question, what is this supposed to be doing to us? I mean, it's a real beast, Musaf of Rosh Hashanah. And last week we did Musaf of Yom Kippur, which is no small potatoes either. So all of that is to say that there's good news because tonight's going to be easy or easier. Tonight we have less unpacking to do. The design is there, but in some ways we've set ourselves up for it all along. So what we're going to have to understand about the prayer that we're looking at tonight, which is the last prayer of the high holidays, Nila, what we're going to understand about Nila or design-wise is going to be relatively straightforward, relatively easy to see. And so we can get right into the question of what's the meaning and how is it meant to affect us? Okay. And after all, this is the climax, the culmination of all of the high holidays. So if we are convinced that these prayers have been taking us on a psychic journey, then surely we have to wonder what the destination is going to be. So that's what we're going to look at tonight. Let's take a look now. Let's just say a blessing before we do, to bring some kedusha, some holiness into our Zoom tonight. Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, so the prayer is called Nila. And just in the name itself, we already have what to talk about. Because the name Nila means, what's Nila mean? It means the locking. Not the closing, but the locking, which is that's an even stronger closing word. So, what we might do right away is start thinking about, well, what's locking, as a prayer experience? What does it mean to say that something's getting locked up? What feeling? Just ask yourself. If I say to you, we're locking it up, what feeling do you have? At the end of Yom Kippur, if I tell you we're going to lock it all up. Okay, so we could already, I'm sure, in this brilliant group, we could start riffing on just what locking evokes in us. But let's just like provide a little more grist for the mill, a little more of the context, and just take a look at some of the language of locking before we dive into the prayer itself. What is that language of locking? How does it appear? So let's take a look. I'm going to give you a source sheet and then I'll share it. Okay, that's the source sheet. Oop, looks like not, hold on one sec. I'm going to give you the linkable version. It's like a quirk of Zoom. Okay, there's the linkable version, and then I'll just screen share it as I do. So first of all, just as a running start here, as I often say, a running start, I just want to remind you of something we've looked at before, which is that Nila, this prayer, this last prayer on Yom Kippur, is unusual in that it is not found on any other day of the year. Now you might think, well, of course, and it's Yom Kippur, like lots of prayers are not found on any other day of the year. What's the big deal? But what I mean to say by that is, actually, most of the prayers over the high holidays are augmented versions of prayers we do every single day. So there is Shacharit on Yom Kippur, and Shacharit on Rosh Hashanah, and Shacharit on Shabbat, and Shacharit on Wednesday. That's the name for the morning prayer every day of the year, including Yom Kippur. And so most of the high holiday prayers that we're going to encounter is just like Mincha of Rosh Hashanah. And then the question is, okay, well, but what does the Amidah look like? What is the standing prayer? What are the words of the standing prayer? Or what Torah readings do we do? Or what do we insert into these prayers? But Nila is something else. And we already said that Musaf is something else because Musaf doesn't appear every day, but Musaf does appear every single Shabbat and every single holiday. Nila is unique to Yom Kippur and unique only one day of the year. Okay, so this is just a reminder. Maimonides sums this up for us. There are, he says, 3 daily prayers. The evening service, this is not your source sheet. This is just a reminder from before. There are 3 daily prayers. Every single day, we daven Aravit, or Mariv, the evening service, Shacharit, the morning service, and Mincha, the afternoon service. Okay, those three prayers a day. Muslims pray 5 times a day. Jews pray 3 times a day. These are standard prayers, okay? On Sabbaths, festivals, and new moons, as I just said, there are 4. There's an extra prayer, the 3 daily services, and the additional service, Musaf. Musaf literally means the additional service, Musaf, adding on to, okay? So that's it. That's the thing. That's about all you have to know on every day of the year, except for on the Day of Atonement. On the Day of Atonement, on Yom Kippurim, there are 5 services. The 4 just mentioned, and Nila, the closing service. So just as I'm giving you grist for the mill here, think about, okay, we have this service, it's called the locking, and it's an unusual service that doesn't appear at any other day of the year. So at the end of the day of Yom Kippur, there's an extra service, and it's the service of locking. Okay, now just one more thing before I open up the group. One more thing, the locking, what is the locking? So some of you, if I ask, what the locking of what? You would probably say the locking of the gates. The gates. Okay, although that is a little more texture. What gates, then you might ask? So let's begin just by looking at some of the language of locking that we will encounter in this prayer, and we're actually going to turn to the piyut that is found at the beginning. So we say a silent Amidah, and then the Chazan repeats the Amidah, but in Sephardic tradition, there's a particular poem that they sing before the repetition of the Amidah, and it's such a beautiful poem that it's been widely adopted. It is found in the Lev Shalem, which is very Ashkenazi most of the time, but has this piyut, this poem, which is El Nora Alila. You know this one? El Nora Alila, El Nora Alila, Amselanu Mechila, Bishata Neila. Okay, that's the refrain. And let me just give you some of the language here so we can begin to talk about what it means that there's locking going on. Okay, El Nora Alila, God awesome and exalted. El Nora Alila, God awesome and exalted. Hamtzi lanu mechila, bring forth forgiveness for us, produce forgiveness for us. Bisha'at hane'ilah, at the hour of locking. Okay, so so this is just one example of many of the poetic descriptions that we will see in Ne'ilah that describe these gates closing. These gates are closing, and then they're being locked, and it's the end of the day, and it's time to close the doors, close the gates, lock the gates, okay? So this is the language that we'll see across our prayers. Let's just start to riff a little bit on this language. What does it mean to say that we're going to enter into an hour of locking, that we're going to close our holidays with the feeling of locking? Taran, you want to start us off?
Yes. You guys can hear me, right?
Yep.
I mean, to continue on the metaphor of power exchange that I talked about last time, I see this as really the locking into the relationship. As much as like we like to look at Ne'ilah and be like, oh, the gates are closing, and we have to we really have to sit and sort of get the last repentance in. I'm really starting to look at Ne'ilah and be like, oh, it's just that like moment in your therapy session when your therapist like, we have 15 minutes left. What else do you want to get off your chest? And then the like energy with it is, hey, we're locking in this relationship with the divine for the next year. Like we're locking in our state of this power exchange and this energetic space.
Okay, great. So you gave us both the classic answer and also an interesting, like a different answer, a different kind of answer. The classic answer is, this is it. This is your last chance. Your session's almost over. What do you want to say? You only have an hour left. So just think about what that feels like if you haven't brought up what you needed to bring up in your therapy session. Right? You've been sort of avoiding talking about it. Like, what's that feeling? Right? Or of any session coming to an end, you only have this much time left. So what are you going to do with it? And that's in some ways the most basic psychology. Okay, but you are, Taran, rightly kind of playing a little bit with, so then what are the implications there? What's locking mean for me? And Taran thinks, well, this whole time I've been trying to negotiate, work on my relationship with God, with this force, with this power, El Nora Alila, this awesome and mighty power. So this is my chance this is my relationship talk. And I've been having it for 25 hours. This is the last thing I get to say. And Taran imagines, this is the relationship then I will be in for the rest of the year. This is the dynamic I will establish, and I'll be locked into it until the time comes again for me to renegotiate terms, to rediscuss the contours of my relationship. Okay, so there's a locking, there's the feeling of a locking, but it may be the last chance before I lock into the relationship with God that I am able to build, I have been trying to build, or that I want moving forward. All right, let's keep going. Noah Pellick.
Yeah.
Noah, we can't hear you.
What about now?
Yep, hear you.
Okay, technical issues. I was saying that this Ne'ilah service, this locking of the gate, it seems akin to me that there's still this heavy weighted feeling on me, like this feeling of sort of great fear that whatever needed to be said hasn't been said yet, whether to God or to people I'm with who I've been focusing on the God aspect, but not so much the people. So it's like time's running out on that end. There's this overwhelming sort of desire to like go to the people and like either apologize or check in, or in other terms, looking at my watch, waiting for the break fast as well.
Okay, good. So there is, Noah then begins to like build on this picture and say, well, then if this is the locking and this is the last chance, then the psychology of that is one of a certain amount of anxiety, is it not? We are being asked to enter into a kind of anxiousness, a kind of wondering, did we do this right? Are we really, have we said what we needed to say? You know, maybe we came in strong. Excuse me, Kol Nidre. Maybe we came in strong, and maybe we said everything we needed to say. You know, in using Taran's therapy session metaphor, we did it. We said it. You know, it's all. Maybe we could cruise out of Yom Kippur because we're feeling good. Nila is asking us to do something different. Nila is asking us, no matter what we've experienced, and we were dancing up and down, and Tayu, yay. Nevertheless, just take a minute and feel like the gates are closing. The gates are closing. The gates are closing. Right? Feel a little bit of that, like, you know, the doors are closing. Please proceed to your gate, you know, run, that kind of feeling. Okay, Maggie, what do you think?
That's exactly what I was going to say, where it's this huge anxiety of, have I discussed everything I wanted to discuss with Hashem? Have I asked for forgiveness for the right things? Have I negotiated that I will be better, so please let me live another year? Let me prove myself so that I can continue living and honoring those that have passed.
Yeah. Yeah, imagine what then is the thing that you want to say? Is there anything in this last hour that actually, not just you need to say, but that will actually fix it? Is there something else that you can say that will do the trick? What is that? What's the one thing I forgot? What's, you know, let me think. How do I, the feeling is like, I have now, the feeling entering into Yom Kippur then suggests Nila almost like, you know, almost by implication, is that I have one day to do this thing, and now I have 1 hour to do this thing. Okay, so what is it? What do I need? What do I need? Alexandra.
So I'm looking at it a little bit differently this year from other years. I think maybe because I've had enough anxiety, most of us have. And so I'm focusing on the El Nora Alila, and I really like to do sort of spiritual experiments, and I've experimented with just saying that sentence over and over, and waking up like the days that feel really heavy and I don't want to wake up and don't want to get out of bed and go through another pandemic day. Like the days that I've just sort of forced myself to say that over and over before anything else have ended up sort of magical, and like strange, unexpected, wonderful things have just popped in. And so this year I'm choosing to look at it. That's what's being locked in. The gloriousness, wonder of God, this expansiveness, anything is possible. And that's how I'm choosing to see it this year.
Yeah. Like what else might locking mean? You know, like locking can be a good thing. Locking something in a safe, making sure it's, you know, everything's secure, that, you know, I've been working on this now for 24 hours, and like, let's seal the deal. Let's, you know, we're good. That's a possibility here. Thank you for that, because, you know, locking is a metaphor. What does it mean? The psychology of the high holiday prayers is not there. There's no official answer to that. We're trying to understand the prayers, and then to ask ourselves, well, how does that make us feel? Like, where does that take us? So thank you for that as an alternative. Josie Kramer.
Well, I agree with everyone about that moment of anxiety and tenseness at the end of coming to it. But I also see it as something else at this exact same time. So I see it as that medieval gates closing, in the sense that here's this big, huge rushing sound that we're all making with the repetitions of words at the end, and it's amazing and it's incredible. But it's locking in those gates that are not celestial, but are reality. It's bringing us from these individual moments of intense prayer back into the community. And that's where we're getting locked in at the end of the day, is coming back to our community, ourselves.
Oh, that's interesting.
Totally double-barreled.
That's really interesting what you're saying, Jesse. Is like there's a locking of the gates, and we tend to think of that as like we're trying, almost like we're rushing through as the gates are closing. Like, can we duck in? But actually, you know, if you play with the metaphor a little bit, we're not going to end up in heaven. That's not the idea. We're not actually jumping over to the other. Maybe we're trying to send messages through the gate, but on some level, a wall is coming down, and then God is left to the heavens, and we're left with each other. And we're back here, and we're in our zone. And we're closing this experience, and we're returning to earth, and we're returning to humanity, and we're returning to our community. And that too is part of what Nila is like allowing for. All right, that there's a locking there that will point us to the other side of the gate, the one that we remain on. Okay, so that's good. All right, let's take one more comment, and then I want to give us a little more of the language of the prayer. Mark Strinnen.
Maybe it's obvious, but Nila strikes me as the fulfillment of the entire behavior that we're doing from the very beginning of Yom Kippur, which is to simulate dying and simulate our death. And the closing is the last moments of a person's life. And the desperation and the anxiety that comes up, if you, the sequence of the prayers in the Nila service, you may be going to that, Rabbi, but the themes of the sequence in the prayers are begging, pleading God, and remember, and saying to God, you're merciful. I'm your child. I'm the child of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'm part of your people. And then there's a confessional. Then there's a vidui in that. And then at the very end, we say the things that you say when you die, Shema, and Baruch Shem Kavod, and then Adonai is Elohim, and then the whole thing ends with a sense of ultimate either triumph or transition or transformation. What is that Tekiah Gedolah at the end? That shofar sounding is a sound of both ending and beginning. So there's a triumphal nature at the end. So I think the anxiety of Nila that's built into it is an attempt to say, this is the last chance, and this is a rehearsal for your last chance. And please, 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 can we be forgiven of our sins? I confess them, and I am ready to live a better life.
Okay, so Mark gives us a whole new theory of Nila here, and a whole new layer to work with. The suggestion, and it's quite right, that there are all kinds of themes of death and life and death, and the reenacting of death, wearing these like white garments, shrouds, really, that those themes, not eating, not having physical needs, transcend. We could point that towards the heavens, like we become like angels, or we could point that imagery towards the earth, like we're going into the ground. And there's a theme of dying here. Mark suggests, and therefore Nila is like the end of your life. What is your last confessional? What is and we do say a vidui al Amidah on the deathbed, right? That is a thing we say, and Mark begins to connect a lot of that. We also say Shema at the end of our lives. So maybe this is like, imagine you were, that's really takes it to another level. Imagine you were dying. Imagine this wasn't just the last hour of Yom Kippur, but your last hour. What would you say? I mean, now that's a lot of anxiety. But I want to pull it back just a little bit from that edge, from that cliff's edge, because Mark is absolutely right that the themes of life and death are all over Ne'ilah, but it may not be that one is going to die this year or in this hour. In fact, the hope is that one will not. And in fact, part of what's being negotiated throughout Yom Kippur is whether or not we will live or die another year, right? Negotiated in metaphorical terms, but like spiritually, just wondering, like, what is my fate? What will be for me this year? Okay. And so the way that Ne'ilah plays with those themes, and I say play with because there's like a very, it's almost like a darling little device that Ne'ilah uses. And I said at the beginning of the class, this is going to be pretty easy to do because, with some of these prayers, we had to map out like 10 different verses from 10 different places on 3 different themes, but with Ne'ilah, there's just the Amidah itself is pretty straightforward. It's the same Amidah Amidah meaning the standing prayer. It's the same one we've been seeing throughout Yom Kippur. There are, as with all the Amidot, they're in like new poems, new prayers. El Nora Alila, we already saw. But mostly it's the same thing, except for one critical difference. And we can see it very easily and very quickly. I just to want to remind you one other, I'm going to take us back to the sheet that I opened with, the one with Maimonides sort of giving us the whole structure of the high holidays. This is a boot camp that we did last year, where we really tried to break down the entire structure. And one of the things what I started off by saying is that if we want to understand the high holiday liturgy, we have to understand, first of all, that a lot of the prayers are just standard prayers that we see every day. So it shouldn't shock us that there's a Shema or an Amidah in the high holidays. A lot of the prayers that we see on the holidays are piyutim, like El Nora Alila, which are sacred poems. And those are really beautiful and well-known, but not mandatory or essential or core. So we haven't spent a lot of time studying them. We have spent a lot of time studying prayers unique to the holiday, like the confessional itself, right? Or like Ne'ilah itself, something that is a totally new introduction, or a totally new piece of material that we don't see in any other prayer. Avinu Malkeinu, prayers that are very special to the holidays. Okay, and then I said there are one of the forms of that are additional services like Ne'ilah, but another one of the forms of prayers unique to the holiday are these little insertions into the prayers. Okay, why am I telling you all this? Because you will, throughout the high holidays, but also in the time in between the high holidays, your Siddur will tell you that there are 3 places in every Amidah, even during the week between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. There are 3 places where you insert little words into your Amidah. Okay, probably sounding familiar to some of you. So let's take a look at what they are and what they look like. There are 3 of them. One comes in the first blessing. The Amidah is also known as the Shmona Esrei because there are 18 blessings in it. And there are actually 19. They added one later. But in the first blessing, there's an insertion. In the last blessing, there's an insertion. And in the second to last blessing, there's a unique insertion that we recite throughout the high holidays. And it's always the same thing. And let me share it with you now. It's the next thing on your sheet. And this is what it is. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I just want us to see this. It's pretty easy to see, but let's just like see it in plain black and white here. Okay. Here, I'm going to take us, this is Ne'ilah, and we're going to first look at Mincha. Mincha will be the last prayer that we said before Ne'ilah. So just to give us a sense of what the transition is. There's a transition that happens in Ne'ilah. Okay, so here's one of the insertions. It's the insertion that we put into the first blessing, Magen Avraham, the first blessing of the Amidah. And you probably know the tune. Zochreinu lechaim, melech hafetz b'chaim, v'chasveinu b'sefer ha'chaim, Laman Chaloim Chaim. Okay, not perfect rendering, but you probably know what I'm talking about. Remember us for life. Zachrenu l'chaim. O King who desires life. Melech chafetz b'chaim. And inscribe us in the book of life. V'chasvenu b'sefer achayim. Write us into the book of life. Lamancha, for your own sake. Elohim Chaim, living God. Okay, that look familiar? And what's important here, of course, is that we now have a different metaphor, and the metaphor is the metaphor of the book of life, the book of life. And this comes from a passage in the Talmud that says that there are books open before God on Yom Kippur, all actually throughout the holidays, the book of life, the book of death, right? And we want to be written into the book of life. Okay, so we can think about that a little bit. We can process that a little bit. But here's the twist. Here's the Nila Twist. It's a dance that everybody's doing, the Nila Twist. Okay, Mincha and Nila, same Amidah, same opening, same insertion, except one thing's different. Zachreinu lechaim, melech hafetz b'chaim, v'chatmeinu b'sefer achayim, leman chaloim chaim. So same thing, remember us for life, O King who desires life, and seal us in the book of life for your sake, living God. Okay, so I've bolded it and I've gone slowly and I'm gonna, I think we all caught what changed, right? Inscribe us in the book of life and then seal us in the book of life. So what Nila is suddenly doing for the first time is sealing things up. Now we've talked about locking and closing, but this is new language, similar language, but new language, the language of sealing. And we know that language, probably some of you have heard or said, Gemar Chatima Tova. After Rosh Hashanah, may you finish with a good sealing. So we're talking about Nila. Gemar Chatima Tova. End this with a good sealing. So let's just take a look at the rest of the places where that appears, and then we'll have pretty much all the information that we need, except for the ending, which Mark has already alluded to. All right, so again, back to Mincha. In Mincha, we say there in the second to last blessing, the blessing of Modim, in the middle of that blessing, we say, Uchtov lechaim tovim kol b'nei vritecha. Inscribe for a good life all the children of your covenant. Now, you can just guess what's coming, right? Inscribe for a good life all the children of your covenant. What's it going to say in Nila? Not inscribed for a good life, but, right? I'm just setting it up. You can say it to yourself. You know what's coming. And seal for a good life all the children of your covenant. Seal. Chatom l'chaim tovim. And the same thing in the last blessing. B'sefer chayim bracha v'shalom ufarnasa tova nizacher v'nikasev. All right. Now you know what's going to happen. In the book of life, blessing and peace and abundant maintenance. What is maintenance? Is like parnasa, abundant success. May we be remembered and inscribed before you, nikatev. And then, of course, in the book of life, blessing and peace, now we're in Nila and abundant maintenance. May we be remembered and sealed before you. Okay, so there it is. Your three insertions. It's like I said, there's something a little darling about it. It's like I always enjoy every year because you've been in shul for 25 hours and you've actually been in shul for 10 days and you're saying the same thing again and again and again and again. And all of a sudden there's a little twist. It's like, it's actually like, it's exciting. Like, wake up, oh, look, it's a little different. And the little difference is a move from writing to sealing. And just one more thing before I open that up for analysis, which is that those three insertions are the places where that changes. And also, one more thing changes, Avinu Malkeinu. Avinu Malkeinu. We say the Amidah, we change those three things, and then we say our last Avinu Malkeinu, which is one of the great prayers of the high holidays. And in the middle of Avinu Malkeinu, we say Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King, please do this, please do this. There's a lot of sentences, please do this, please do this. And in the middle, there are the ones that we recite out loud, okay? The first few look exactly the same. Avinu Malkeinu, hachazirenu b'shuva shlema lefanecha. Our Father, our King, bring us back in wholehearted repentance before you. Our Father, our King, send complete healing to the sick among your people. Our Father, our King, tear up the bad in our judgment. Our Father, our King, remember us favorably before you. Okay, all of that, that's Avinu Malkeinu. And then the next piece, our Father, our King, chatmenu b'sefer chaim tovim. Seal us in the book of good life. And I didn't bring the comparative text because by now you know. What does it usually say? Kasvenu b'sefer chaim tovim. Write us in the book, inscribe us in the book of good life. But here it says, seal us. Our Father, our King, seal us in the book of redemption and deliver us. Our Father, our King, seal us in the book of, I don't like this translation, maintenance, of parnasa and chalkala, of success and thriving. Our Father, our King, seal us in the book of merits. Our Father, our King, seal us in the book of slicha umechila, pardon and forgiveness. Okay, so there you have it. And, you know, obviously very, very gendered language here. That's just another of the metaphors, and it's just a metaphor. God is not male. But our Father, our King, write us in the book of life, write us in the book of life, write us in the book of life, all the way through the holidays, and then suddenly, okay, seal it up, seal it up. Okay, so this is really, in some ways, I'm just turning back for more of the same, because I asked you to think a little bit about what is locking, what is closing, what is this hour, what is the feeling of this hour, but now it's the same feeling. There's a shutting, there's a closing, but it's a different kind of closing. It's the closing of a book. It's the sealing of a book. So let me turn back and ask, like, what's that psychology? What is the psychology, and how does it build on what we've been doing so far? How does it build on the psychology of locking? There's now a psychology of sealing, okay? So Gary Wexler, start us off here. Good to see you, Gary.
Hi. So I see this as a psychology of possibility, okay? Katvenu b'sefer chayim, write us into the book of life, different from death, where there is no possibility and it's final. Life is filled with possibility. We are asking to be written into the book of life. So katvenu in chatmenu, even though they sound very final in the language, when you write something, you always rewrite something. When you seal something, you eventually open it up and reseal it. So I think it's conveying a psychology of awareness, but also knowing that in life there's possibility and the writing can be rewritten. You can rewrite your life. You can reseal it. You can open it up again. So there's all sorts of potential here.
You know, I just love that, Gary. And I've never, you know, this is like what the joy of learning Torah is, that like, it seems like you do this for 20 years and I've never thought of it that way before. Never thought of it that way before. Such an important thing to say, which is that a seal is not permanent. I never thought about that. We think of the language of sealing as permanent. It's the writing that can be erased or changed, rewritten, and then it's sealed. And then that's it. And it is it in the metaphor for a year, but next year it's unsealed, right? And so Gary's right. There's a kind of like, put me down for another year. Put me down for another year, and then we'll discuss again. Let's just see what happens. Something about this language of sealing is like, it's the end of one chapter or negotiation, but it is not permanent. It's a stop along the way. And that's a whole new way of looking at this. I appreciate that very much. Florine Rosen.
Well, going back to locking and then to sealing, I believe that locks symbolically can be opened and seals can be removed. So I believe the whole relationship that you were referring to for 25 hours, I never counted them, the relationship of confessing, learning about oneself, being forgiven, being redeemed maybe, that's the power of God and me, and God and the community, that will open the lock. I don't see the lock as negative. I believe that there is a great power that rises up in the synagogue and opens the lock, and we go forward if we've done the work.
Okay, this is great. So now Florian is building on what Gary just suggested, bringing it back to the locking, which after all also is, I guess, not permanent either. Death is final. There are things that are final, but locking can be unlocked. Sealing can be unsealed. Now, it does mean that, I mean, it's locked for now. It's sealed for now. There's a gravity to it. It's not like, oh, good, we'll just change it tomorrow. Something about this locking that's significant, but it isn't your death sentence, right? It's your this year's sentence, right? It isn't necessarily, I guess, your death sentence. Marla and John, where are we seeing you, Marla and John?
You are on our patio in Leawood, Kansas, and you're all welcome. We have plenty of space for Sukkot. Come, please.
Right on. All right. What do you think about this, Marla?
Okay, so first of all, Yasher Koch to Gary, and I love what Florian said too. And I wanted to kind of just say for Gary, I think that the 25 hours of Yom Kippur, it's not that overwhelmingly difficult to repent and get into the tefillah and understand where we're supposed to be going. Where it gets difficult is once we leave. And I look at Nila as the seatbelt. I'm now going to lock in and go out there and take all those things that I've just promised for those 25 hours amongst my community and really have to put them to work. And for me, that's what the sealing, unsealing is. It's like a seatbelt. I'm going to lock in and go out there. And like Gary beautifully explained, I'm going to be able to unlock it to interact with those that I meet along the way that aren't locked into shul for 25 hours, but are living in the real world.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. You know, you remind me, Marla, in the way you describe it, that like a seal in that ancient kind of imagery is like, you know, it's a beautiful thing. Like you seal, it's like has a design to it. And what we're asking for is a good seal, the seal of the king or the queen or whatever, like the, you know, the good seal, the one that, and you walk around, you got this letter or this book or and it has the insignia and the seal on, and that's, you're walking around with that. And this is what you work with for the year. I got a good seal this year. Right? And it means something, and it represents the work that I've done to get there so that I can now walk around. That chapter is closed. And maybe this past year, actually, some of that chapter was bad. It was bad, and I'm not proud of what I did this year, but I worked on it, and I got a good seal, right? Because that's really the question, the theological question of whether or not God is going to doom us or save us in the year. That's like a, you know, as I tend to think of all that as a metaphor, but we could debate those theological questions. But that's not relevant in this moment. In this moment, we're all supposed to be aspiring towards a good seal. We're all supposed to be believing that in this hour we can leave with a good seal. That is possible. We just daven our hearts out. That is possible. So that's important. Walking around with a good seal. Okay, let's take a couple more hands. I saw Beth, and then Kathy and Hal, and then we'll move into the last section of Nila.
Yeah, thanks. There's been a little chat going on in the little texting going on in the chat about how does this relate to Unatana Tokef, where on Rosh Hashanah it is written, and on Yom Kippur it's sealed, who shall live and who shall die. But then it says, but Teshuvah and Tefillah and Tzedakah can avert that. So even though it's sealed, maybe it's not permanent. So it's just a little more support for the idea of the seal not being totally permanent.
Okay, great. Yes, that's important stuff that you're talking about. But then I sort of brush aside the theological questions because I'm not a believer in a God that like decided you have to die this year. But it's there in our liturgy. They are important theological questions to grapple with. And so I want to just respond in a couple of ways to Beth's point here. One, in saying that let's keep in mind that if we follow the metaphor, then what we're talking about, like the psychology of not just Ne'ilah, but of the whole high holidays of writing and sealing, is that B'Rosh Hashanah yichatevun u'v'Yom Tzom Kippur yichasemun. On Rosh Hashanah, it is written, and on Yom Kippur, it is sealed. Okay, so on Rosh Hashanah, you receive your assessment, your evaluation, your performance review, right? Or if you want to be a little harsher, your sentence, your judgment on Rosh Hashanah. But on Yom Kippur, it's not sealed till Yom Kippur. And that means you have 10 days to erase what's in the book, to change what's in the book, to put yourself in a different book, to get a different seal. So the work is, I have fixed it. Even in the midst of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, nothing is permanent. And then the question is, wait a minute though, what about after Ne'ilah? What about when the gates close? And Beth is saying, well, is it ever really permanent? And I think our tradition has struggled with that question a lot. And I want to just cite a very famous midrash that says that the gates of prayer open and close, but the gates of tshuva are always open. Okay, so the author of the liturgy on Rosh Hashanah and Kippur is designing a particular metaphor, but in comes another strain in the tradition and says, wait a minute. Some things close, some opportunities end, some portals disappear, but there are certain channels that we always have to God. And it ain't just Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We always have that access. So Beth is wondering, and I think we all have to wonder with Beth and with this midrash, whether there isn't, yeah, sure, these gates are locked, but there isn't like some kind of back door here, right? Okay, good. Hal and Kathy, I think I saw you out there. Are you still out there?
No, I put it in the chat.
Okay.
A better intro song would be Signed, Sealed, and Delivered. Only in this case, I think the deliverance has several meanings. So that's it. Anyways.
Okay, wait. Okay, so on that note, the song that I chose by Semisonic, Closing Time, right? I chose with some intention, obviously. This is Sha'at Ne'ilah, the closing time. I want to just remind us of another line in that song. I know who I want to take me home. I know who I want to take me home. And I was thinking of that line also because, I also knew who I want to take me home after Yom Kippur. God. I want God to take me home, right? Like I want to end up with someone at the end of the night. And it's the Holy One. So with that kind of in mind, let's now move to just take a look at the end of Ne'ilah, because the gates are closing, the seal is being kind of stamped, and so we are at the last hour, and then we come down to the last few minutes, and it's as if the end of Ne'ilah, we say this, the Amidah, and we say Avinu Malkeinu, write us in, and the last things we're saying is write us into seal us into the book of life. We've been saying write us, now seal us. And then the gates that's it, they're about to close. And it's as if they're just we just want to shout just a couple of last things, just a few last things before the gates close. And the few last things, as Mark already told us, are Shema, Baruch Shem Kavod, and then the last lines of Yom Kippur. Let's take a look at them. Let's take a look at them now. Oh, before we do, I see one more hand that we haven't seen. Emily, do you want to insert a thought before we move on from it?
Well, it's somewhat of a question, and it harks back to what Mark said about death. And so I've always had this feeling at the end of Ne'ilah, like, oh shoot, I didn't really spend the 10 days the way I should have, and I didn't apologize to this person or that person or whatever. And then it's like, well, there's next year. But is part of this metaphor to remind us that you could die, you could die anytime, and it's to push us to get it together before the the gates close, on Yom Kippur, but really before the gates close permanently.
Yeah, I really appreciate that comment, question, reflection, Emily, because there is a way in which, and I know, listen, I also have been dealing with a lot of anxiety this year, and I don't want any more of it, so I'm also a little resistant to like anxiety metaphors, and yet there's something powerful about, I'm not saying this is exactly what Emily was saying, but sort of pointing in this direction, the idea that maybe we always should be living in that Ne'ilah consciousness, because it could end at any moment. I mean, and isn't that really the point of all of this death metaphor in Yom Kippur? Not that God decides at the beginning of the year, that's a metaphor. But the idea is like, you really never know it. This might be the year for any of us. It might. And today might be the day, and this might be the hour. So if that were the case, think Ne'ilah. What's the last thing you want to do or say or feel or communicate or express? I have this, when I leave my mother's house, may she live for decades and decades to come. But I leave her house and, sometimes I just I walk out, and then I realize I should have hugged my mother, what if this is the last time I see her? And God forbid, I walk out in a huff, because it's my mom and she triggers me like everyone, and it's but this could be the last moment. And there's something powerful, and I have walked back into the house because of that thought and said, I'm sorry, I love you. And maybe it's not the most heartfelt I love you in the world, but in case this is the last thing I say, and that's maybe we need a little more of that urgency, if not anxiety, urgency. This is it. This is your one chance. This is your one life. What are you going to do with it? As Mary Oliver asks. So, okay, let's now move to these. What are you going to do with it? What are the last things that you would say to your mom? What are the last things that you would say to your friend? What are the last things that you would say if this is the last conversation you have with God? So let's take a look. And some of them are not so surprising. So this is we finish, we say a Kaddish, and then all of a sudden we say these 3 things. And we actually say these 11 things because we say the first one once, second one 3 times, and the third one 7 times. So what do we say once? Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Okay? And that's not so surprising. I mean, isn't that just the most important kind of sentence in our tradition, right? Okay, so Shema. And as Mark said earlier, this Shema is the last thing that if we know we're dying, if we're on our deathbed or we're in an emergency, there's a tradition. Say the Shema as the last thing you say. Okay. Then, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. This is the thing that we say right after the Shema. And the reason that we do is because there's a midrash that says that the first person to say the Shema was Jacob's sons. All right, listen, Israel. We acknowledge that the Lord is ours and the Lord is one. And then Jacob responded, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. Great, great. But we have this tradition that Jacob was borrowing language from the angels. And so we don't usually say Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam. May the name of the glory of God's kingship be forever and ever. That's a wild thing to say. It's a little how do you know the name of God's glory? I know it's a little funny, but we have this tradition that only the angels say that, and so we say it quietly all year. But on Yom Kippur we say it out loud because we're like the angels, and we say it out loud in the Shema itself. But most prominently at the end of the day. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. And now, by the way, we're really screaming. And if you haven't had any kind of psychology in your high holidays so far, this is the moment to tap in deep. This is it. This is the, and I have to say, if I think back on my Yom Kippur experiences, and when have I had really moments of exaltation, I'm often thinking about this last moment when you're starving. And you're and you're delirious and you've been standing, your back hurts. And then suddenly all of a sudden there's a new burst of strength and you're screaming, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed, 3 times. And then finally, and this is the last word, the last line of the high holidays. Okay, and then there's a Tekiah Gedola. And the last line is, these are the last thing. The gates are closing. The book is sealed. And what we say 7 times is, Adonai Hu HaElohim. Adonai Hu HaElohim, 7 times. The eternal, right? The word for God, which alludes to God's eternality, which we pronounce as Adonai, is Elohim, is God. Now, this is the last thing I want to do with you, is try to figure out this last line. What does this mean? Adonai Hu HaElohim. The eternal is God. Now, I feel like I wanted to do more explaining and more like, what does the eternal mean? What is God? But let's just stop and hear from you all. What is going on here? This is the last thing that we want to say. Shema, Baruch Shem Kavod, those are familiar. But Adonai Hu HaElohim. What is that? Anyone want to offer their interpretation of this before we parse out every single word? Just like the feeling of this last ceremony. I'm seeing Noah, Mark, and Florine. I'm not sure if you're commenting on this. On this, Florine? Yes? Noah?
Yes.
Yes, go for it, Florine.
The word Elohim to me is the most beautiful word because it reflects the many dimensions of Hashem. And since I've studied Kabbalah for years, I believe that when I leave synagogue and I've heard that and I've done that practice, I feel like, yes, I'm made in the image of God. And I've just had an experience, which I hope will last, where I will go back out in the world and I will reflect those images of God in my life. So for me, that prayer just does it.
Okay, good. All right. Let's hear from Noah also, and I want to take some of what you said, Florine, and use it. But let's hear from Noah also. What are you thinking, Noah?
Yeah, I'm thinking that this is a wonderful way to end the Ne'ilah and the Kabbalah. It's bringing together the God's strict side and the compassionate side all together in this one line, affirming God as our Lord. And I feel like that just makes the whole, I guess, high holiday season is as it is, because at Rosh Hashanah we're reaffirming God's kingship, etc. Yom Kippur we're pleading, and then at the end we're saying, God, you're God, and we're still with you.
Okay, great work, both of you. Both Florine and Noah are looking at these 3 words. It's just 3 words. This name of God is this name of God. Adonai is Elohim, right? And immediately, both Florine and Noah starting to think, well, wait a minute, what do those names really mean? Just not just, oh, that name of God is the same one as it. What do those names mean? Okay, so let's just do some of that work together. And Florine and Noah was starting to do it for us. Elohim is a plural word. It's kind of a funny thing. We begin the Torah by saying, Bereshit bara Elohim. And the verb is singular, but the noun looks plural. Our first word for God is Elohim, which literally means the gods. As if to say all of the gods are one God. Or, as Florine was expressing it, it also means the powers, the forces. All of the forces of the world are actually one force. But it's a word that means power, force, okay? So the many forces are one force. So that's Elohim. Adonai, and we don't ever pronounce the word. It's not really pronounced Adonai. Adonai means my master. But my master is, Yud He Vav He, the tetragrammaton, they call it. And That word is a kind of a hybrid word that plays with the verb to be, and it's sort of like a mashup of was, is, and will ever be. Haya, hoveh, yihiyeh, right? So if you mash them together, it looks something like Adonai. So what does Adonai, that name, mean? That's our primary name. It means the God who always was and always is. We hear another echo of this when Moses asks God, what's your name? And God says, I will be what I will be. I am that I am. I just am. I always am, and I always will be. So I often translate it, and I have here, as the eternal, that which always is. Okay, so wait a minute now. Part of what we might be saying then, and this is a lot to say, suggests Florine, if you know your Kabbalah, then you know that part of what we're saying is the eternal one is the same thing as all of the forces in the world, right? That which is now, the forces which dominate now, or the forces which have always dominated, God has always been there. God has always been there. And Noah picks up on this sort of art of identifying the names of God, and says, oh, it's also true, and Noah's right, that by tradition, the name Adonai is a name of mercy, rachamim, and the name Elohim is a harsher name, a name of judgment. And there are many, many commentaries that try to show you how through the Torah, when God appears and asks Abraham to sacrifice his son, it's definitely Elohim, the God of severity and judgment and harshness. And when God is doing something kind, it's inevitably like stopping Abraham from doing it. It's inevitably Adonai, the God of mercy. Okay, so there, again, you have another big theological statement Noah's suggesting, that maybe what we're saying at the end is the Adonai hu Elohim, the God of mercy, is the God of justice. Okay, you see what we're kind of doing here? And I want to just, because Noah said it, I want to give you the last text of the night before we open up for final thoughts, because what Noah said is very similar to what one of my favorite Hasidic commentators, the Maor Vashemish, Rav Kalonymus Epstein, I believe. The Maor Vashemish says the following thing, very similar to what Noah just said. He says, why do we say after Ne'ilah, Adonai hu Elohim? Well, we say it 7 times. He says, and the 7 hints at an ascension into the upper worlds. What does he mean by that? The higher we ascend from level to level, the more we begin to understand what we previously thought, which is that Adonai, the name of God, which represents pure mercy, and which we assumed had nothing to do with judgment, that should be a hyphen here, is actually the same as the God we call Elohim. So very similar to what Noah just said, that the final realization of Yom Kippur is that the God of mercy is the God of justice, that it's all one, it's all the same. Okay, wow, what a big thing to say, mind-blowing, except what does that mean? So let's take our last minutes together and ask, what does that mean? Why this last line of the high holidays, Adonai hu Elohim, might mean, as Florine rendered it, all of the forces of the world are actually one eternal force. Or as Noah rendered it, and so did the Maor Vashemish, the God of mercy is actually the God of justice. Now, what does all that mean? And, to tip the hand a little bit, let's not forget that what we've been dealing with for the last 10 days is really the God of justice, right? So now, in this last moment, what does it mean to say that the God of mercy is the God of justice? Okay. So let's hear some final thoughts. Mark.
This ending of Ne'ilah is not linear. It appears to be linear. You go from Shema to blessing the name to Adonai hu Elohim. But it's actually cyclical. The very last God, Adonai hu Elohim, goes right back and points back to the Shema. Because in the Shema, we say both names of God. We say Adonai Eloheinu,
That's
Adonai,
right.
And so what happens then is, as you're moving through this sequence, you probably have a moment of panic. I'm about to die. Which God should I call on? The mercy God, whose name is Adonai, or the justice God, the judge, whose name is Elohim? And I just said that it's all one in the Shema. And I'm blessing this name. I'm looking in desperation for the name. And at the very end, the last moment of Yom Kippur consciousness is I recognize, oh my goodness, Adonai is Elohim. And I don't even say it once, I say it 7 times, which brings me back to the Shema. And then I either go on with my life or my life ends. That, especially metaphorically, the life, which is the life of the shortfalls and the sins and all that kind of stuff that I did past year. It's beautiful. The architecture of this is absolutely stunning.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I mean, first of all, you're right that, you know, once you're screaming Adonai Hu Elohim, having just said Shema, that is part of what you realize. Oh, the Shema also says, right, that Adonai is Eloheinu. That is that merger, and it's all one, right? So in some ways, we're doing this all the time, but this is a really direct, compact, precise formulation. God, Adonai is God Elohim. And I love the way you put it, Mark. It's like, maybe I've been spending my whole Yom Kippur, my whole high holidays, my whole life wondering, like, what is God good or is God mean? Is God kind? Does God love us, or is God severe? Like, what is the nature of God? And the answer is not the one that we might want, which is like, oh no, God's good all the time, God's kind all the time, yay, God loves us. No, it's like, it's both. It's both. Somehow there's all of the experiences of God I have had, some of them pleasant, some of them unpleasant, some of them terrifying, some of them comforting. They're all part of one big force, echad, right? And that realization may be the goal, the aspiration of this entire process, is to come to understand, at least as the Order of Hashemish narrates it, we get more and more sophisticated in our understanding of God as we ascend. And finally, we come to understand that, oh, the different versions of God that I've been dealing with, the different metaphors that I've been using, the different experiences that I've had, the ways that reflects on me and my relationship with God. Will I be punished or will I be saved? Which book will? It's all one. It's all the same. Okay. Now, what exactly does that mean? I mean, that's a powerful thing. So, what exactly? All right, so let's see if we get any last thoughts on it. Gary, what do you think of this?
So I'm thinking of it more auditory than the actual words itself. It's like we have been in deep prayer, deep thought throughout the entire day, the relationship between humans and God. And it's been multiple humans. I mean, think of Ikar on good years. You've got 1,500 people sitting there, and you've got this plurality dealing with this one entity in this way. And so the whole day has been in this relationship. And at the end of the whole thing, you go into this shout, like the king is there. This is my king. This is the guy. This is the person. This is what is. And so it's this auditory release at the end of the day, rather than the words itself. They make you feel really good after you've just poured your guts into this for now, for 10 days and for this whole period in the month of Elul and all of this stuff. And it's like, it ends at this exaltation.
Okay, great. That's true too. There's a lot going on here theologically, but it is just a final rallying. Just as that scream is also, it's part of the psychology, the experience as well. So that's important also. Elizabeth?
So all of this that we're hearing is true, but for me, it has to do with I give up, I surrender. You're the one, and I am nothing. I have no choice in this matter, and I let it go. So this is not about anxiety. It's the opposite. I'm okay. Whatever happens, happens. you're the guy, I am not, I'm done.
Yeah, that's great. That's great, Elizabeth. And in some ways, I think that ties on nicely to what Gary was just saying. There's a little bit of a like, okay, I'm done thinking about this. I'm done trying to get into books. I'm done trying to, like, just like, do with me as you will. I am done. We are done here. Like, close the gates, call it a year, right? Like, that's part of the energy here too. And you know, there is some very deep theology going on here. I mean, there's something very powerful about spending all of this time with this like judgment, executioner kind of imagery, and then to end by saying, yeah, but really the God that's been presiding over all of this, the God that we're so worried about, is actually the God of mercy. It's the same thing, and that God's going to come through for us as well. And I think that's part of what we're saying here is like, no way God's gonna write us into the book. No way, because he's also Adonai. He's also the God of mercy, right? And if there's any final proof of that, it's the fact that the service comes to an end with Adonai Hu Elohim, but then the shofar is blessed, and then what do we say? We do say one more thing. It's not part of the official Ne'ilah, but we say one more thing. We say, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. Next year in Jerusalem, as if to say, oh, we'll definitely be here next year. No way, we made it, right? The gates are locked, we're in. I'll see you next year, okay? So with that, I will see you not next year, although it will be next year. I'll see you next week and it'll be next year. Thank you for taking this tour with me. I hope and pray that it has made that has deepened our relationship to these prayers and opened up the possibility that we might take not just a liturgical journey, but really a deep psychological, spiritual journey as we move through the Machzor this year. Been a pleasure. Shana Tova to everybody. Join me on a pre-Rosh Hashanah hike on Sunday if you wish. And Shana Tova.